The rain was merciless that night, pounding against the cracked windows of the tiny apartment like 1,000 fists. Elena stood trembling in the doorway, one hand on her swollen belly, the other clutching the suitcase her husband had shoved into her arms. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and terrified. Adrian's voice still echoed in her head, sharp and venomous. "You're useless, Elena. I don't need a burden like you holding me back. Go survive on your own if you're so capable." His words cut deeper than the cold wind outside. She had once believed this man was her future. Now he was nothing but the storm that wrecked her life. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as Elena stumbled into the street, but no one dared to help. To them, she was just another woman abandoned by her husband. They didn't see the quiet strength in her eyes or the fire hidden beneath her tears. Every step down that lonely street felt heavier, but Elena whispered to her unborn child, "We'll make it. I promise you, we'll make it." She didn't know how. She had no money, no family left, and nowhere to go. All she carried was the knowledge of the 7 languages she had spent years mastering, a skill that felt useless in that moment of despair. But destiny works in silence. That same night, across the city, a powerful billionaire named Leonardo prepared for an international summit where world leaders and tycoons would gather. He didn't know it yet, but the interpreter who would soon save him from disaster was none other than the woman now wandering the streets with rain soaking her dress. Elena couldn't imagine that the same voice Adrian had silenced for years would one day command attention in 7 different tongues, opening doors to a love story more powerful than the betrayal that broke her. And as thunder cracked above, she had no idea her darkest night was the very beginning of a new destiny. Elena Alvarez was the kind of woman who never drew attention in a crowd, but when she spoke, the world leaned closer. Born in Madrid to a modest family of teachers, she grew up surrounded by books, music, and the gentle rhythm of words spoken in many tongues. Her father taught French at the local high school, her mother German, and together they encouraged her curiosity. By the time Elena was 12, she was already speaking 4 languages fluently. At university, she added 3 more: English, Italian, and Mandarin, making her a true linguistic prodigy. But Elena's brilliance wasn't matched by her confidence. She was quiet, humble, the kind of girl who worked behind the scenes rather than bask in the spotlight. While her classmates pursued glamorous careers abroad, Elena dreamed of simple things. A small home filled with love, a partner who cherished her, children who would grow up hearing bedtime stories in different languages. That dream seemed to arrive when she met Adrian. He was handsome, charming, and ambitious. A young entrepreneur who dazzled her with promises of stability and devotion. For Elena, who had always been more comfortable in libraries than in nightclubs, Adrian felt like an anchor in a noisy, confusing world. Within months, they were married, and Elena left behind a promising career as a translator to follow him to New York. The early days were filled with hope. Adrian laughed at her accent but kissed her forehead after, telling her she was his secret weapon. He said her 7 languages would someday open doors for them, but in reality, he never allowed her to step into those rooms. Instead, he urged her to stay home, to cook, to clean, to prepare for the family they would one day build. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, her heart swelled with joy. She believed it would bring them closer, that Adrian would finally see her, not just as a quiet woman in his shadow, but as the mother of his child, the partner who gave him a future. Yet the pregnancy only widened the cracks in their fragile marriage. Adrian grew impatient, dismissive, even cruel. He called her weak, a burden, a woman too ordinary for the glittering life he craved. Still, Elena endured. She told herself that love meant sacrifice, that every sharp word was just stress, that he would return to the man she once adored. At night, when the baby kicked, she whispered lullabies in Spanish, French, and English, promising her child a world full of languages, colors, and possibilities. She held on to hope because it was all she had left. But as her belly grew, so did Adrian's resentment. He spent more nights away, claiming business meetings. He returned smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. He mocked her homemade meals, her frugal habits, her secondhand maternity dresses. And yet Elena still clung to him, desperate to keep her family intact, desperate to believe her suffering had meaning. She didn't know that the man she trusted was preparing the cruelest betrayal of all. And one stormy night, he would decide that both Elena and her unborn child were no longer worth keeping. New York City had always been a dream for Elena. When she first arrived, fresh out of graduate school, she thought the city lights were promises waiting to be fulfilled. Skyscrapers gleamed like silver towers, and the streets pulsed with energy in 100 different languages. For a linguist like Elena, it felt like the world's heart was beating right outside her window. But dreams have a way of souring. By the time she was 6 months pregnant, her life had shrunk to a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Queens, its walls cracked and its heater clanking with every cold night. The rent ate most of their savings, leaving little for comfort. She spent her days folding laundry, tutoring students online for pennies, and listening to the muffled laughter of neighbors through the thin walls. The city that once seemed like endless opportunity now felt like a cage. Adrian, on the other hand, moved through Manhattan as if he owned it. He polished his shoes until they gleamed, wore suits a size too expensive for their means, and boasted about his big deals over whiskey with men who barely remembered his name. He craved the life of the Upper East Side, gala dinners, rooftop parties, the illusion of power. And every time he looked at Elena, swollen from pregnancy and weary from exhaustion, he saw an anchor holding him down. The contrast was cruel. While Elena walked to the grocery store with coupons in hand, Adrian borrowed money to take clients to five-star restaurants. While she stretched every dollar to prepare meals for the week, he bought designer ties and called it an investment in his image. Their tiny kitchen smelled of rice and beans, but his breath often carried the scent of champagne. Despite it all, Elena tried to make their apartment a home. She decorated the baby's corner with hand-painted stars on the wall. She sewed small clothes with scraps of fabric, humming lullabies in Spanish and Italian as she stitched. Every gesture was her way of fighting the darkness that crept into their marriage. But Adrian wasn't fighting with her. He was fighting against her. His absences grew longer, his tone sharper, his patience thinner. When she asked where he'd been, he dismissed her with a wave. When she begged for more time together, he accused her of being clingy. And when she suggested they save money for the baby, he snapped, "Do you want me to look poor in front of my clients?" The apartment, once a refuge, became suffocating. The walls closed in with every argument. Even the sound of the baby's heartbeat at the clinic, something that should have brought them closer, only seemed to push them further apart. Elena began to wonder if the city itself was swallowing her whole, burying her dreams under the weight of Adrian's selfishness. Still, she endured. She told herself New York was a city of comebacks, that if she just held on long enough, things would change. She whispered promises to her unborn child that they would one day walk those busy streets with pride, not shame. But she didn't know the next storm would begin, not outside her window, but inside her own home. And soon, in that very apartment, Adrian would deliver the words that shattered everything she thought was safe. Adrian Navarro had once been the kind of man who could charm an entire room. He had the smile of a politician, the swagger of a rising businessman, and the kind of confidence that could make people forget his flaws. That was the man Elena fell in love with. The man who held her hand in Madrid, whispering promises about building a life together in New York. But the man who stood before her now was a stranger. The years had stripped away the charm and left behind only arrogance. Adrian was obsessed with appearances. He measured his worth in expensive suits, luxury cars he couldn't afford, and the attention of people who didn't care whether he sank or swam. He wasn't building a life with Elena anymore. He was building an image, and she was no longer part of the picture. At first, the changes were small. He came home later, brushing off her questions with, "Business. You wouldn't understand." He spent money recklessly, while demanding she save every penny from her tutoring jobs. He mocked her homemade dresses, telling her she looked too plain for a man of his status. And when she tried to remind him of the child they were bringing into the world, his answer was chilling, "Don't guilt me with that baby. It's not going to change my future." The truth was, Adrian had already replaced her in his mind. He had been seen at rooftop parties with a sleek young woman named Cassandra. a marketing assistant with glossy black hair and a laugh that carried across champagne glasses. Elena had noticed the perfume on his shirts, the lipstick stains on his collar, but each time she confronted him, he turned it back on her. "You're paranoid," he sneered. "You're insecure. That's your problem, not mine." It wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty. Adrian wanted Elena to feel small, to believe she was nothing without him. At dinner, he compared her unfavorably to other women. At parties, he left her alone in the corner, pregnant and ignored, while he basked in the glow of strangers. At home, he treated her silence as weakness, her kindness as stupidity. But beneath her tears, Elena carried a strength Adrian couldn't see. He mistook her gentleness for fragility, not realizing that every cruel word was quietly hardening her heart. Still, the breaking point came one stormy night. Elena begged him to stay home, just once, because the baby had been kicking painfully and she was scared. Adrian scoffed, adjusting his tie in the cracked mirror. "I'm not wasting my life babysitting you. You'll manage. You always do." Then, with ice in his eyes, he said the words that would haunt her forever. "You and that baby are dead weight. Get out." He shoved her suitcase toward the door and walked out without looking back. And in that moment, Elena realized the man she loved had become her greatest enemy. The storm that began in their apartment followed Elena into the heart of the city. She thought Adrian's rage would burn out behind closed doors, but Adrian thrived on cruelty with an audience. It was a Friday evening when the truth came crashing down in the most merciless way possible. Adrian had insisted she join him at a dinner with business partners. Elena, 7 months pregnant and already exhausted, dressed carefully in her only decent maternity dress. She told herself it was a chance to show him support, to remind him they were still a team. She hoped that maybe, in the presence of others, he might soften. The restaurant was a glittering Manhattan hotspot filled with polished wood, crystal chandeliers, and the laughter of the city's elite. Elena clutched her small purse and followed Adrian inside, trying to ignore the uneasy looks from the hostess and diners who took in her swollen belly and second-hand gown. At the table sat 2 suited investors, and beside them, Cassandra, the woman Elena had suspected for months. She was radiant in a red silk dress, her manicured fingers resting possessively on Adrian's arm. Adrian didn't move her hand. He didn't even look guilty. Instead, he pulled out Cassandra's chair, like a gentleman, and left Elena standing awkwardly beside the table. The investors chuckled uncomfortably, but Adrian broke the silence. "Gentlemen, this is Cassandra, my future, and," his tone shifted, dismissive, "this is Elena. She won't be around much longer." The words hit harder than a slap. Elena froze, her cheeks burning as every eye at the table turned toward her. She tried to speak, to protest, but Adrian cut her off. "She's been holding me back for too long. A man like me doesn't succeed by dragging dead weight." His gaze flicked pointedly to her belly. "You understand." Laughter, low, cruel, careless, rose from the table. Cassandra smirked, leaning in as though Elena were nothing more than a bad memory. Elena felt her throat close. Her baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if reminding her she wasn't alone, even if the world was watching her shatter. Whispers rippled through the restaurant. Diners stared openly, some with pity, some with amusement. To them, Elena was a tragic figure, discarded and humiliated. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the floor, to escape the eyes that judged her. But her legs wouldn't move. Adrian signaled the waiter with a wave of his hand, as if dismissing her presence entirely. "She was just leaving," he said coldly. And that was it. The life she had built, the marriage she had sacrificed for, the man she had believed in, all gone, erased in one cruel performance. Elena turned and walked out into the night, her tears mixing with the city rain. But as the door closed behind her, a pair of unseen eyes had been watching. And her story was about to take a turn no one at that table could imagine. The rain didn't stop that night. It chased Elena down the sidewalk, drenching her dress until it clung to her body like a second skin. Her shoes slipped against the wet pavement as she stumbled into the shadows of the city, her tears indistinguishable from the storm. She had walked out of the restaurant without looking back, but the sound of Adrian's laughter followed her like a curse. She reached the subway station and sat on a cold metal bench, her suitcase heavy at her feet, her belly rising and falling with each trembling breath. For the first time in her life, Elena felt truly invisible. People brushed past her, umbrellas dripping, eyes averted. To them, she was just another woman discarded by a man with more money than loyalty. No one saw the brilliance she carried. The 7 languages, the sharp mind, the gentle heart. All they saw was a pregnant woman alone, shivering in the rain. Her thoughts spiraled. How would she survive? Rent was due in a week. Her tutoring sessions barely covered groceries, and soon she would have a baby to feed. She thought of her mother, gone too soon, and her father, buried in his books back in Madrid. She thought of calling him, begging for help, but shame stopped her. She couldn't bear to admit that the man she had chosen had abandoned her so cruelly. The subway roared past, spraying mist across the platform. Elena closed her eyes, gripping her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Her body shook with sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. The city felt endless and empty, a labyrinth of lights where no one cared if she disappeared. That night, she didn't go home. She checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Queens, the kind where the walls were stained and the sheets smelled of cigarettes. She curled on the bed, clutching her stomach, praying for the strength to wake up the next morning. Sleep came in broken fragments, filled with images of Adrian and Cassandra, their laughter echoing like knives. In the darkness, Elena came face to face with her deepest fear, that she would raise her child in poverty, forgotten, voiceless, just another tragic story in the city that swallowed dreams. Her tears soaked the pillow as she realized that the life she had sacrificed everything for was gone, and all she had left was the child within her. But somewhere in the silence of that grim motel room, a spark flickered. It wasn't hope yet, but it was defiance. Adrian had thrown her away, but she was still here. Her child was still here. And deep inside, she knew she had something no one could take from her. Her voice, her gift, her 7 languages. And in just a few days, that gift would put her face to face with a man powerful enough to change everything. 3 days passed in a blur of exhaustion. The motel's flickering neon sign became Elena's only nightlight, while the thin walls carried the sounds of strangers arguing, laughing, and stumbling drunk down the hallways. Each morning, she forced herself to get up, to eat something small for the baby, to open her laptop and continue her online tutoring. It was barely enough to survive, but it was something. On the 4th morning, as gray light seeped through the curtains, Elena's phone buzzed with an email notification. She almost ignored it, expecting another overdue bill, but the subject line caught her eye. Urgent. Interpreter needed for International Business Summit. Her breath caught. The email had been forwarded by an old university professor in Madrid who remembered her brilliance with languages. A last-minute emergency had left the summit without enough interpreters. They needed someone immediately, someone who could handle Spanish, French, Mandarin, and English at minimum. The pay was generous, more than Elena had earned in months, and the chance to work with world leaders and executives was once in a lifetime. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. This could change everything. But doubt gnawed at her. She was heavily pregnant, exhausted, living out of a suitcase. How could she walk into a room filled with the powerful and the polished and pretend she belonged? Would they laugh at her the way Adrian had? Would they see only weakness instead of strength? Still, something inside her stirred. The child growing within her deserved more than despair. Elena had 7 languages living inside her, 7 voices waiting to be heard. Maybe this was her moment to step out of the shadows. She packed her few belongings into her battered suitcase and took the subway to Manhattan, her nerves rattling with every stop. The summit was being held at a luxury hotel on 5th Avenue, its marble lobby glittering with crystal chandeliers and polished brass. Elena felt out of place in her worn dress and flats, but she straightened her back and lifted her chin. For her baby, she had to be strong. Inside the conference hall, chaos reigned. Delegates from China, France, Brazil, and the United States spoke over one another, their words colliding in confusion. Documents were lost in translation, tempers flared, and the event teetered on collapse. The lead coordinator spotted Elena and rushed to her side. "You're the replacement interpreter? Thank God. Get in there. Save this mess." Elena stepped forward, her palms damp with fear. But as soon as she began to speak, first in English, then French, then Mandarin, the room shifted. Heads turned, voices quieted. Her translations were crisp, elegant, and flawless. For the first time in weeks, she felt powerful, alive. This was her gift, and no one could deny it. What Elena didn't know was that at the head of the table, watching her every move with sharp, intrigued eyes, sat Leonardo Moretti, the billionaire whose decisions could shake entire industries. And as he listened to Elena's voice glide effortlessly between 7 languages, he realized this was no ordinary woman. The summit ended with thunderous applause. Delegates who had been seconds away from walking out now shook hands, smiling as though the earlier chaos had never happened. Elena, flushed and breathless, stood at the side of the hall, clutching her notepad. Her feet ached, her back throbbed from the weight of her pregnancy, but for the first time in months, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Pride. As the crowd dispersed, she quietly packed her things, intending to slip out unnoticed. But before she could leave, a tall figure stepped into her path. He was striking, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair flecked with silver at the temples. His presence carried an authority that made people lower their voices without realizing it. "Miss Alvarez, isn't it?" His voice was low, smooth, touched with an Italian accent. Elena froze. She recognized him instantly. Leonardo Moretti, billionaire industrialist, a man whose face appeared regularly on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. The kind of man her ex-husband Adrian had dreamed of becoming but never could. "Yes," she managed, her voice small. "I was asked to fill in last minute." Leonardo studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "You didn't just fill in, you saved the summit. Without you, half the contracts on that table would have dissolved. Do you realize the magnitude of what you just did?" Elena shook her head, overwhelmed. "I was only doing my job." A faint smile tugged at his lips. Humility and brilliance, rare qualities in this city. Her cheeks warmed. She didn't know what to say. Billionaires didn't notice women like her, women in second-hand dresses, women with weary eyes, women carrying babies alone. Yet Leonardo's gaze wasn't mocking or pitying. It was curious, respectful. He handed her his card, embossed with gold lettering. "I may have need of your talents again. 7 languages, I hear? That is no small gift." Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti, but I'm not sure." "Don't doubt yourself, Miss Alvarez," he interrupted gently. "The world already does that enough. You should not help it." His words struck her deeper than he could have known. She thought of Adrian, of every insult and dismissal, and for a fleeting second she felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone of worth. Leonardo inclined his head politely before moving toward the exit, his entourage trailing behind him. But just before he disappeared into the crowd, he glanced back at her one more time, his eyes holding a question she couldn't quite read. Elena stood frozen, the business card clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart raced, not from attraction, at least not yet, but from the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life was not over. And she had no idea that this chance encounter was the beginning of a love powerful enough to challenge everything she thought she knew about survival. Adrian Navarro thrived on gossip, and Manhattan was a city that whispered. It didn't take long before the news reached him. The interpreter who had saved an international summit and caught the attention of Leonardo Moretti was none other than Elena, his discarded wife. He first heard it at a rooftop bar, glass of scotch in hand, Cassandra hanging on his arm. An associate laughed as he recounted the story. "You should have seen her, Adrian. That little Spanish girl?" She spoke like lightning. Even Moretti was impressed. Rumor is, he gave her his personal card. The words sliced through Adrian's pride like glass. His smirk faltered, and for a moment he forgot Cassandra was even there. He had built his identity on control. Control over deals, over appearances, over Elena. And now the woman he had humiliated in public was being celebrated while his own career stalled in mediocrity. That night, rage consumed him. He paced his apartment, replaying every insult he'd hurled at Elena. Useless, weak, dead weight. He had believed them, but if she was standing beside Leonardo Moretti, then maybe he had miscalculated. Maybe Elena was stronger than he'd ever imagined. And that terrified him. Cassandra rolled her eyes, swirling her wine. "Why do you care, Adrian? You said she was nothing." She is nothing, he snapped, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. But if she thinks she can rise above me, if she thinks she can humiliate me, she's got another thing coming. In truth, it wasn't about love. Adrian hadn't loved Elena in years. What burned in him now was pride, the fear of being overshadowed, the fury of being proven wrong. He couldn't stomach the idea of her finding dignity where he had left her broken. Meanwhile, Elena's world was slowly shifting. The memory of Leonardo's words, "Don't doubt yourself, Miss Alvarez," echoed in her mind as she returned to her modest motel room. For the first time, she looked at her reflection and didn't see a victim. She saw a woman who had faced humiliation and still stood tall. She began to tutor with more confidence, to send her resume to agencies, to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by Adrian's cruelty. But Adrian wasn't finished with her. He began making calls, pulling favors, digging into her life. He spread rumors in business circles, painting her as unreliable, unstable, even dangerous. "She's pregnant and desperate," he told one contact. "Trust me, she'll embarrass you." He wanted doors closed to her before they could open. What Adrian didn't realize was that some doors could not be shut, not when someone like Leonardo Moretti had already decided to keep them open. One evening, as Elena was leaving a small cafe after meeting with a potential client, she caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. Adrian, leaning against a black car, arms folded, eyes cold. He hadn't looked at her that way since the night he'd thrown her out. He stepped forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "So this is the new you? Playing translator for scraps? Don't think a billionaire will save you, Elena. I'll make sure of it." Her heart pounded, but she held his gaze. For the first time, she didn't shrink. She simply turned away. But what Elena didn't know was that Adrian's jealousy had already set a trap, one that could destroy everything she was beginning to rebuild. The days that followed Adrian's reappearance were some of the hardest Elena had ever endured. His threats lingered in her mind like shadows, poisoning every step she took. She pushed herself harder, working long hours, tutoring online, accepting translation jobs, and running across the city for meetings. Each dollar mattered. Each hour mattered, yet the stress weighed heavier with every passing day. Her body, already burdened by pregnancy, began to falter. Swollen ankles, pounding headaches, sleepless nights. Still she pressed on. "Just a little longer," she whispered to her baby. "We're almost there." But the truth was she was running on empty. One afternoon, she was hired to translate at a high-stakes meeting involving foreign investors. The hotel ballroom shimmered with wealth, crystal glasses, velvet chairs, the low hum of powerful voices. Elena focused on the words flying across the table, her pen moving quickly, her voice steady. But inside, her chest tightened, her vision blurred. The room spun. She tried to hide it, gripping the edge of the podium, forcing herself to breathe. But then the pain struck sharp and sudden, radiating across her stomach. A gasp escaped her lips and papers slipped from her hands. Gasps erupted from the room as she swayed and collapsed to the floor. When her eyes fluttered open, the first thing she saw was him, Leonardo Moretti, kneeling beside her, his hand firm yet gentle on her shoulder. His eyes, dark, steady, held none of the judgment she feared, only concern. "Stay still," he said quietly. "Help is on the way." Voices buzzed around her, but she heard only his. Paramedics arrived, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Leonardo walked beside her, never leaving her side, his commanding presence parting the crowd. At the hospital, while doctors examined her and monitored the baby, Leonardo waited in the hallway, refusing to return to his empire until he knew she was safe. When Elena was finally allowed to rest, he stepped into the room. His usual sharp elegance seemed softened, replaced by something she hadn't expected: genuine care. "You shouldn't be carrying all of this alone," he said, his voice low. "Not the work, not the burden, not the pain." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't have a choice. I was left with nothing." Leonardo pulled a chair closer. "No, Elena. You were left with everything that matters. Your strength, your child, your voice. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Elena felt something stir inside her. Not just gratitude, but a fragile spark of trust. She didn't know why this powerful man cared, but in that moment she felt less alone than she had in months. He reached for her hand, not as a billionaire offering charity, but as a man offering solidarity. "Let me help," he said simply. And as his hand closed gently over hers, Elena realized her life was about to take a turn she had never dared to imagine. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the baby's heartbeat on the monitor. Elena lay propped against the pillows, exhaustion weighing heavy on her, but her eyes remained wide open. Across from her, Leonardo sat with the same composure he carried into boardrooms, yet there was a gentleness in him now, as if his power had been set aside at the door. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Elena broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Why are you here? You don't even know me." Leonardo leaned forward slightly. "Because I've seen strength before, Miss Alvarez. I know what it looks like, and I know what it costs. You shouldn't have to pay for it alone." Her throat tightened. For months she had buried her pain, swallowing it down, pretending she was fine. But under his steady gaze, the dam cracked. Words spilled out, raw and unfiltered. She told him everything. How Adrian had once charmed her, how he slowly turned cruel, how he humiliated her in public and left her with nothing but a child and a broken heart. As she spoke, tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. "He called me useless," she whispered. "Dead weight. He made me believe I was nothing, and for a while I believed him." Leonardo's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened, his hands curling slightly into fists. "Men like that," he said evenly, "confuse control with power. They mistake cruelty for strength, but they always forget one thing. Women like you don't break. You bend, you endure, and when the time comes, you rise." Elena looked at him through tear-filled eyes, unsure whether to believe him. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," he admitted. "But it is possible. I've seen empires collapse and rebuild. You are no different. You are more valuable than you know." Her heart clenched. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not with respect, not with faith. She wanted to argue, to protect herself from hope, but deep down she felt something shift. "Why would a man like you care?" she asked softly. He paused, then answered with simple honesty. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything that matters, and because I don't want to see you lose more than you already have." For a long moment they sat in silence, their hands resting close on the blanket. Elena's fears, her shame, her loneliness, they didn't vanish, but for the first time they felt lighter. Leonardo stood finally, adjusting his jacket. "Rest. Tomorrow, we talk about how you can start again." He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Elena closed her eyes, holding on to his words like a fragile lifeline. She didn't know if she could trust him completely, but for the first time since Adrian had thrown her out, she felt the faint possibility of a future. And outside the hospital doors, Adrian was already plotting his next move, determined to crush the hope that had just begun to take root. Elena left the hospital 2 days later, her steps careful, but her spirit steadier than before. Leonardo had arranged a driver, but she insisted on taking the subway. She didn't want to feel dependent on him, not yet. Still, his words lingered in her mind. "You are more valuable than you know." Back at the motel, she unpacked her small suitcase and tried to resume normal life. She opened her laptop, logged into her tutoring sessions, and forced a smile for her students. Yet something was different. She felt less like a ghost, more like a woman who might one day step back into the world. That chance came sooner than she expected. An email pinged in her inbox. "Elena Alvarez, recommended for translation project, urgent." She frowned, scrolling. The message came from Lucia Torres, an old university friend from Madrid. They hadn't spoken in years. Lucia was now a rising figure in cultural diplomacy, known for organizing international exhibitions. "Elena," the email read, "I heard about your performance at the summit. Impressive. I'm in New York curating an exhibition for the UN. We need someone with your skills immediately. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Elena's heart leapt. She hadn't realized anyone from her past still remembered her. She replied quickly, nerves buzzing through her veins. The next day she met Lucia at a sleek gallery near Central Park. Lucia was radiant in a tailored suit, her confidence unmistakable. But when she saw Elena, her expression softened. "You look tired," she said gently, "but I see the fire in your eyes hasn't gone out." Elena laughed weakly. "I feel like it almost has." "Then let me help you relight it," Lucia said. She explained the project, an exhibition showcasing rare artifacts from around the world, attended by diplomats and dignitaries. "We need someone who can handle multiple languages, especially for live tours and press conferences. The pay isn't billionaire level, but it's honest work, and it will put your name back where it belongs. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to say yes immediately, but doubt whispered. What if she failed? What if Adrian sabotaged her again? Lucia seemed to read her mind. Listen to me. You've always had a gift. Don't let a man's betrayal erase it. This is your chance, Elena. Take it. With trembling hands, Elena signed the contract. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was stepping forward. But as she left the gallery, sunlight warming her face, a figure lingered across the street, watching her. Adrian, hidden behind dark glasses, his jaw clenched in fury, and in his pocket, he carried papers that could turn Elena's fragile new opportunity into her worst nightmare. The exhibition work with Lucia gave Elena a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Each day, she arrived at the gallery early, her belly leading the way, her voice carrying across rooms filled with priceless artifacts. Diplomats leaned in to listen as she effortlessly switched between Spanish, French, English, and Mandarin. For the first time, applause was for her, not the man standing beside her. But shadows don't vanish easily. Adrian's shadow grew darker with every step she took forward. One afternoon, as she finished a tour, a courier handed her an envelope with her name printed in cold block letters. She opened it cautiously, her heart sinking as she scanned the contents. Legal papers. Adrian had filed a petition claiming parental rights to the child, before it was even born. Her knees weakened. The documents painted her as unstable, unfit to raise a child alone. Words like financially incapable and emotionally volatile leapt off the page. Adrian had hired ruthless attorneys, the kind who twisted truth into poison. He was trying to take her baby before she even held it in her arms. That evening, Elena met Leonardo at a quiet corner cafe to show him the papers. Her hands shook as she laid them on the table. "He's trying to take my child," she whispered, her voice breaking. Leonardo read silently, his jaw tightening with each line. "This is intimidation," he said finally, his tone cold with fury. "He doesn't want the child. He wants control over you." Elena pressed her hands to her face. "I can't fight him, Leonardo. I don't have the money for lawyers." "He'll win." Leonardo leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination. "Not if I have anything to say about it. You're not alone in this, Elena. I'll make sure of it." His certainty was like a lifeline, but fear still gnawed at her. Adrian wasn't only using the courts. Rumors were spreading again. Anonymous calls to the gallery claimed she was erratic, difficult, even dangerous to work with. Some whispered she had connections with criminals overseas, a lie planted to ruin her reputation. Lucia confronted her gently one morning. "Elena, I know these are lies, but you need to be ready. Adrian is powerful in his own way, and he's determined." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice steadied. "Then I'll be just as determined. He took my dignity once. He will not take my child." She clutched her belly, whispering softly in Spanish to her unborn baby, promising to protect them no matter what. But deep down, fear coiled tight. Adrian's cruelty knew no limits, and he had already taken the fight to court. And soon Elena would find herself standing before a judge, Adrian smirking on one side, Leonardo watching from the other, as the battle for her child began. The courtroom smelled of polished oak and cold ambition. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling slightly as she folded and unfolded the hem of her dress. Beside her, a public defender shuffled through papers, clearly overworked and outmatched by the gleaming team of attorneys across the aisle. Adrian sat with them, leaning back in his chair, his smirk sharp as a knife. He wore a tailored suit, one hand casually resting on Cassandra's knee as if he had already won. The judge entered, and the room rose. Elena's heart pounded. This wasn't just a legal hearing. This was a battlefield for her dignity, her child, her future. Adrian's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of Elena as weak, unstable, and financially incapable. He spoke of her living in motels, of her reliance on handouts, of her emotional distress. "Your Honor," he concluded smoothly, "this woman cannot provide a stable environment for a child. Mr. Navarro, however, is prepared to give the child every opportunity, financial, educational, and social." Elena wanted to scream. Adrian didn't care about opportunities, he cared about control. But when her lawyer rose to respond, his voice was hesitant, his arguments flimsy. Adrian's team smirked with satisfaction. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked Elena directly, "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mrs. Alvarez?" Her mouth went dry. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't powerful. But she remembered Leonardo's words, "Don't doubt yourself." The world already does that enough. Slowly, Elena rose. Her knees shook, but her voice steadied. "Your Honor, I may not have wealth. I may not have status, but I have something my child deserves: knowledge, resilience, and love." She gestured toward Adrian. "This man calls me unstable. Yet I've built a life teaching 7 languages to students across the world. I've translated at summits, exhibitions, and negotiations. I've been entrusted to bridge cultures and preserve peace. If I can help nations understand each other, surely I can raise my own child." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge raised her brows, intrigued. Adrian scoffed loudly. "She's just a glorified translator. Words won't raise a child." Elena's eyes locked on his. "No, Adrian, but respect will, and I will teach my child in 7 languages what you never taught me in 1: dignity." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even Adrian's lawyers looked unsettled. Cassandra shifted uncomfortably beside him, her smirk fading. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Alvarez, your testimony is compelling. We will reconvene after reviewing the evidence." Her gavel struck once, and the room buzzed with shock. Elena sat down, breathless. She had faced Adrian's cruelty in public and stood tall. But as she gathered her things, Adrian leaned across the aisle, his smile venomous. "This isn't over, Elena," he whispered. "You think you've won because you can talk pretty? I'll destroy you in ways you can't even imagine." And outside the courtroom doors, a journalist who had overheard everything was already dialing a number that would drag Elena's battle into the glare of the media. 2 days after the hearing, Elena's name was no longer confined to court documents. It was on the front page of digital tabloids, splashed across headlines like fire. "Pregnant interpreter stands against wealthy ex-husband in emotional courtroom battle." Another headline read, "7 languages, 1 mother's fight." At first, Elena was horrified. She had tried to keep her struggles private, to protect her baby from the world's scrutiny. Now strangers knew her story. Strangers debated her life in comment sections, on morning shows, and even at coffee shops. But something unexpected happened. The public sided with her. Clips of her courtroom statement had been leaked. Her declaration about teaching her child dignity in 7 languages struck a chord with millions. Social media exploded with admiration. "She's incredible," one comment read. "This is what strength looks like." Others shared their own stories of betrayal, of being silenced, of finding their voices again. For the first time, Elena wasn't alone. She was part of something larger. A chorus of women who refused to be broken. Yet with support came risk. Paparazzi camped outside the gallery where she worked. Journalists called her non-stop. Some wanted to help, others only wanted scandal. Even Lucia warned her, "Be careful. The press can lift you up one day and tear you down the next." And Adrian? He raged. Headlines mocked him as the arrogant husband who discarded a woman only to watch her rise. His associates whispered behind his back. Business contacts began pulling away. Cassandra pouted at his side, annoyed that her glamorous evenings were now clouded by ridicule. One night, Adrian smashed a glass against the wall, shards glittering across his penthouse floor. "She thinks she can humiliate me in front of the whole world? Fine. If it's war she wants, it's war she'll get." Meanwhile, Elena struggled with the sudden glare of attention. Walking down the street, strangers recognized her. Some offered encouragement, others whispered behind their hands. She held her belly protectively, murmuring in Spanish to her child, "We're safe, we're stronger than this." Leonardo, watching from the sidelines, stepped in quietly. His legal team began preparing stronger defenses, his influence shielding her from some of the worst attacks. Yet he never forced himself into the spotlight. He simply told her, "The world sees your strength now. Don't let it scare you." Elena nodded, though inside she trembled. Strength was one thing, but living under the unblinking eye of the public was another. Then one evening, as she returned home to her motel, she found an envelope taped to her door. Inside was a photo, her leaving the courthouse, one hand on her belly. Across the bottom, in Adrian's handwriting, were 4 chilling words: "This is just beginning." And Elena realized that the battle had moved beyond the courtroom, into a war where Adrian would stop at nothing to break her. Adrian believed he held all the cards, but he underestimated one thing: Leonardo Moretti's reach. After the courtroom hearing and the media storm, Leonardo quietly began to investigate Adrian. He wasn't doing it out of pity. He was a man who hated bullies, and Adrian's smug arrogance had struck a nerve. Leonardo had built his empire by exposing fraud and crushing dishonesty. Men like Adrian were fragile under scrutiny. Within weeks, Leonardo's private investigators unearthed what Adrian had tried desperately to hide: financial records, falsified invoices, shady dealings with offshore accounts. Adrian's so-called business empire was a house of cards, propped up by lies and risky debts. One evening, Leonardo invited Elena to his office. The space was vast, lined with glass walls that framed the New York skyline. She sat nervously across from him, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "I have something you need to see," Leonardo said, sliding a folder across the desk. Elena hesitated before opening it. Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents: bank transfers, signed contracts, evidence of tax evasion. This could ruin him," she whispered. Leonardo nodded. "It will ruin him, but I won't release it unless you want me to. This is your fight, Elena. You decide how to use it." Her chest tightened. For months she had felt powerless, crushed beneath Adrian's control. Now, for the first time, she held a weapon in her hands. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "If I use this, won't I be just like him? Cruel?" "No," Leonardo said firmly. "You're not destroying an innocent man. You're protecting yourself and your child from a predator. Justice isn't cruelty, Elena. It's survival." She closed the folder slowly, her mind racing. Images of Adrian mocking her, humiliating her in public, threatening to take her baby, flooded back. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. This was reclaiming her dignity. But Leonardo wasn't finished. "There's more. He's already under quiet investigation by the SEC. If these documents go public, he won't just lose in court. He could lose his freedom." Elena's breath caught. The thought of Adrian behind bars sent a chill through her. Part of her longed for it, but another part trembled at the idea of what he might do before that day came. Leonardo leaned closer, his voice calm but unyielding. "You don't have to decide tonight, but know this: you are no longer at his mercy. He is at yours." For the first time, Elena felt the weight of power shift. The man who had called her worthless, who had left her on the street in the rain, was now vulnerable to her choice. She left Leonardo's office with the folder tucked against her chest. The night air felt different, less suffocating, more alive. She whispered to her child in Spanish, "We're not afraid anymore." But as she turned the corner toward her motel, headlights flared in the darkness, stopping her in her tracks. And inside the car, Adrian waited, ready to remind her that power always comes with a price. The night Adrian's car blocked her path, Elena didn't get in. She clutched the folder from Leonardo to her chest and walked away, refusing to let fear dictate her steps. That choice marked the beginning of a transformation she never thought possible. Elena had been surviving for months, moving from one day to the next with little more than grit and exhaustion. But now, armed with the truth of Adrian's corruption and the support of allies, she began to rebuild. Not just her career, but herself. Lucia was the first to notice. "You carry yourself differently," she said one morning at the gallery. "It's like you finally remember who you are." Elena smiled faintly. She was starting to. She no longer saw herself as the woman thrown into the rain with nothing. She was the interpreter who had saved an international summit, the mother who refused to surrender her child, the woman who had endured and risen. Leonardo helped too, though quietly. He introduced her to stylists and consultants, not to change who she was, but to reveal her strength more clearly. For the first time, Elena wore tailored dresses that highlighted her figure without hiding her pregnancy. Her hair, once tied back in hurried knots, now framed her face with soft waves. When she walked into a room, people didn't see a discarded wife. They saw a woman with presence. But the real transformation wasn't in her clothes. It was in her mind. She began practicing speeches, sharpening her words the way she once sharpened translations. In the mirror, she rehearsed, calm, clear, commanding. The timid tones Adrian had mocked were gone. In their place was a voice steady enough to silence a crowd. At night, she whispered to her unborn child in 7 languages, not with desperation, but with pride. "You will know resilience," she promised in Spanish. "You will know courage," she vowed in French. "You will never know fear," she declared in Mandarin. Each word was a stitch in the new fabric of her life. The media, still buzzing from the courtroom, began to notice her change. Headlines shifted. From victim to victor. The rise of Elena Alvarez. Invitations arrived for interviews and events. For years, Adrian had used power to silence her. Now her story was being amplified for the world to hear. But transformation also painted a target on her back. Adrian seethed as he watched her shine, his jealousy festering into rage. He could tolerate her survival, but not her success. Not her dignity. Elena, however, was ready. No longer hiding in the shadows, she was preparing for the moment when she would face Adrian. Not in secrecy, but under the glare of lights where the truth could no longer be denied. And that moment would come at the city's most prestigious gala, where Elena would walk in, not as a victim, but as the woman who could finally bring Adrian to his knees. The night of the gala shimmered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors, and the city's elite mingled in gowns and tuxedos. For Adrian, this event was supposed to be his stage, a chance to prove he still belonged among the powerful. He arrived with Cassandra draped on his arm, his smile sharp, rehearsed, desperate. But when Elena walked through the doors, all eyes shifted. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her frame with elegance, her baby bump embraced rather than hidden. Her hair cascaded in polished waves, her eyes steady, glowing with quiet defiance. Leonardo Moretti walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back, his presence commanding the respect of every man in the room. Together, they were impossible to ignore. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's her, the interpreter who stood against her ex. She's radiant. And she's with Moretti? Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and Adrian's carefully built facade began to crack. He forced a laugh, pulling Cassandra closer, as though clinging to her presence could steady him. But when Elena's gaze locked on his across the room, he felt the ground shift. She wasn't the trembling woman he'd thrown into the rain. She was untouchable now, her strength undeniable. The evening reached its peak when Leonardo, flanked by international dignitaries, invited Elena to speak. She took the stage with a microphone, her voice calm but resonant, flowing effortlessly between English, French, and Spanish, as she introduced the exhibition's mission of unity. Each language rolled from her lips like silk, captivating the audience. Adrian's fists clenched. The more she spoke, the more irrelevant he became. Then, at the height of her speech, Elena paused. Her eyes found Adrian in the crowd. "There are people who believe they can silence others through cruelty and control," she said, her tone sharpening. "But words are powerful. Truth is powerful. And no matter how much someone tries to bury it, the truth always rises." Gasps rippled through the room. Some glanced at Adrian, realizing who she meant. Cassandra shifted uncomfortably at his side, her smile faltering. Leonardo stepped onto the stage beside Elena, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "And tonight," he added, his voice like steel, "we stand with those who rise." The applause thundered, echoing through the hall. Elena stood tall, no longer the broken woman, but a figure of resilience, her dignity shining under the lights. Adrian, red-faced, tried to clap along, but the smirks and whispers around him made it clear. His power was slipping. For the first time, he wasn't the one controlling the story. She was. And as the applause roared, Adrian stormed out of the gala, straight into the waiting hands of investigators holding warrants that could end his empire. Adrian Navarro's empire crumbled faster than anyone expected. The morning after the gala, headlines screamed of his arrest. Businessmen charged with fraud and tax evasion. Photographs showed him being led in handcuffs from his penthouse, his face twisted with fury. Cassandra was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished the moment the investigators arrived. Elena read the news in silence, one hand resting on her belly. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply breathed, deeply and freely, for the first time in years. Justice wasn't about gloating. It was about release. The man who had humiliated her, who had tried to steal her dignity and her child, no longer had the power to touch her life. Weeks later, her world shifted again. Labor came in the quiet hours of dawn. She was rushed to the hospital, contractions fierce, fear and hope warring inside her. For hours she fought, gripping the bed rails, whispering prayers in Spanish, French, Italian, each language a promise, each word a shield for the life inside her. When the cry finally filled the room, Elena broke into tears. A baby girl, tiny but strong, was placed in her arms. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and whispered in English, "You're safe now. You're mine." Leonardo stood by the doorway, silent, respectful, but his eyes glistened. He had seen empires rise and fall, but nothing as powerful as the love of a mother holding her child. When Elena looked up at him, exhausted but radiant, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, and the faintest spark of something deeper. Days turned into weeks. Elena adjusted to motherhood. Sleepless nights softened by the tiny breaths of her daughter. She named her Sophia, after her mother, carrying forward a legacy of resilience. Every time she sang a lullaby, in Spanish, in French, in Mandarin, she felt the chains of her past loosen. Yet healing wasn't only personal. The media that had once sensationalized her struggle now celebrated her triumph. Articles hailed her as the woman who stood against betrayal and won. Women from around the world wrote letters thanking her for being their voice. She wasn't just Elena Alvarez anymore. She had become a symbol. But fame also brought new challenges. Invitations poured in, offers to speak, to write, to share her story. Leonardo urged her to take her time, to heal first. "You've already won," he reminded her. "Now, live." And she did. She lived each moment with Sophia, cherishing the peace she had fought so hard to earn. Still, deep in her heart, she knew her journey wasn't finished. Healing had begun, yes. Justice had been served, yes. But there was one chapter left to write, a future not just for her child but for herself, as a woman no longer defined by loss but by love. And that chapter would begin the night Leonardo finally revealed what she had come to mean to him. The evening was calm, the city lights twinkling like 1,000 stars against the Manhattan skyline. Elena stood on the balcony of her modest new apartment, Sophia cradled in her arms. The baby's soft breaths rose and fell against her chest as she hummed a lullaby in Spanish, the melody carrying into the night. For the first time, peace felt real. No more fear of Adrian lurking in the shadows. No more humiliation echoing in her mind. Just the quiet rhythm of motherhood and the promise of tomorrow. Behind her, the door opened, and Leonardo stepped onto the balcony. He carried no entourage, no business calls buzzing in his ear, only a small bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, though she had never told him. Somehow he just knew. "You look radiant," he said softly. "Motherhood suits you." Elena smiled, tired but genuine. "It's not easy, but it's worth everything." They stood in silence for a moment, the city buzzing far below. Finally, Leonardo spoke again, his voice steadier than the trembling in his chest. "Elena, I've built empires, negotiated with kings, crossed oceans, but I've never admired anyone as much as I admire you. You've faced storms most would not survive, and still you stand. Not just for yourself, but for your daughter." Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sorrow. This time, they were born of recognition, of finally being seen for who she was, not what she lacked. Leonardo took a careful step closer. "I don't want to replace what you've lost. I only want to stand beside what you're building. A life with dignity. A home filled with languages, love, and hope. If you'll let me, I'd be honored to share it with you." Elena's heart raced. For so long she had believed she was broken, unworthy of love. Yet here was a man who saw her scars not as flaws but as proof of her strength. She looked down at Sophia, whose tiny hand grasped her finger, and then back at Leonardo. "You were there when I was at my weakest," she whispered, "and you made me believe I could rise again. If this is a new chapter, then yes, I want you in it." Leonardo's expression softened, relief and joy mingling as he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then it settled. We start anew, together. The three of them stood beneath the night sky, no longer bound by betrayal or fear. Adrian was gone, justice had been served, and Elena's life was no longer defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had reclaimed. Her story was not just survival, it was triumph. A testament to every woman told she was worthless, to every mother forced to fight for her child, to every soul that refused to break. And as the city lights glowed brighter, Elena Alvarez stepped fully into her new life. Not as a victim, but as a woman who had found love, dignity, and the future she deserved. So my friends, that's where Elena's story closes. But if you're still here with me until now, I know something in this journey touched your heart in a real way. Maybe it reminded you of your own battles, or maybe of someone you love. And that means this story isn't just about Elena, it's about all of us. Life will knock us down, sometimes in ways that feel unbearable. But like the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Elena was left broken, humiliated, with nothing but her unborn child and her voice. And yet, by choosing courage over despair, she found not only healing, but love and dignity. Her journey reminds us that pain doesn't have the final word. Resilience does. Every betrayal, every loss, every heartbreak can be the soil where strength grows. And if Elena could rise from the rain with nothing but her faith and her 7 languages, maybe you can rise from your storm too. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's keep reminding the world, no storm lasts forever.